Mr. Miracle #3, Tom King writing Mitch Gerards on art. So are you ready for some dark emotion and depression? Because,
Yeah.
geez, the Christmas story. I mean, there was me thinking that nothing was ever going to top the dead dad Santa story from Gremlins, but here we go. We get a new one from old Granny Goodness.
I kind of knew where that was going, just the fact that Granny was saying it, but I didn't know it was going to go to that place.
Oh, it was
Yeah.
super dark.
Like,
Yeah, so Scott's telling this story to Big Barda, and she's not even listening. She's asleep, but
yeah,
he's getting this off his chest. He's like, it's 9 panel grid. He's like in bed, and he's just kind of, and it's actually he said it over. Basically, Orion is insisting that they go and dig up Granny Goodness and decapitate her because he wants her head on display. Kind of like a savage. Like he's like going full
yeah, and
dictator
like
here.
here's my thing with Orion. I'm not that familiar with him before, but if I'm just judging off of Mr. Miracle, this dude is not okay.
Yeah,
Like
I've never seen him as that much of a dick because like his
yeah,
whole thing was, he always fought his nature of being
Yeah.
from Apocalypse, and he overcame it to become
Yeah.
a son of New
I
Genesis.
I think that's a plot point, though, and we'll get to
Yeah.
that later. I think there's a
Yeah,
reason
yeah,
for
yeah.
that.
But I'm just saying, like, if I'm an Orion fan going into this, I'm kind of upset because holy crap, in this issue, the stuff that he does, like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's brutal.
he's pretty dark. But as this is happening, as we're getting these, it's like 3 or 4 pages of just like this constant digging in, picking up the body, then cutting off the head with like a saw or something, whatever it is. But he's telling this story that Granny Goodness used to always tell him at Christmas about this kid. What country was it?
Netherlands.
Netherlands. When it was Nazi occupied, and
Yep.
how this kid was in class, and I can't remember what this was story the teacher was talking about, but it was about needing a place to hide, and I was talking about that's right. It was about the Bible. It was the nativity.
Yes, Christmas.
Christmas, yeah, that's right. I blanked, okay. But he was talking about how they needed a place to stay, and the teacher mentioned they were Jewish, and he's like, "Oh, they could stay in my basement," and they're like, "Wait a minute, why is he saying that?" It's because his family was hiding some Jewish people in his basement. So,
Yep.
they showed up at the house, they shot the father, the wife and children, including him, all went to camps over time. And then it was only a few years later where he eventually went to a gas chamber. Alright? And that's already like super dark. Like, shooting the parents in front of him, dark. Going to the gas chamber, dark. And then the final little capper on it, he didn't even die from the gas. He died under the pile of other bodies as he was trying to get out.
Can we point out at the time of this he is 7?
He is 7,
Yep.
yes. On top of all that, he is 7. And then at the end, Granny Goodness would say,
Ugh.
"Merry Christmas." I was not prepared for this story. This is the start of the book. This was the first like 3 or 4 pages. I'm like, Jesus,
Yep.
what? I mean, it was talking about Jesus, but Jesus.
And on top of this story is them digging up Granny Goodness and decapitating her. So, like, not only is there not like art that's doing the counterpoint, it's like you're getting a double dose of it.
Do you know what I found very interesting about what was happening in the background? All the stuff with that. It was doing the the video static thing that we
Yeah.
saw a
Yeah.
lot in the first
The tracking
issue,
lines.
which implied to me that Scott was experiencing this. He was seeing it because that's how
Yeah.
we went through his mind in that first issue. He was seeing things like that. And
Yeah,
that's
that's fair.
interesting if he's seen this.
Yeah, it could just be he's thinking about it later on. Like this happened
It could be,
earlier,
yeah.
and he's thinking about it. But yeah, maybe there's more to it than that. Maybe there is more going on. And it's just he gets up to get a drink of milk, and Forager Bug shows up,
Yep.
and he's there to tell him, "Hey, Orion's going a bit nuts. He's basically like murdered or let like so many of my people be murdered in this war. Some of them are basically being sacrificed in like
Yep.
no-win scenarios."
6.5 million.
Yeah, and apparently the next plan that he wants to do, which is invade Apocalypse, will kill 3 times as many, 4 times as many. And he's like, "We don't want to follow him anymore." But when you the patrols you led, your regiments, they were the ones that survived the most. You're the best leader. We want to follow you. And he's like, "Hey, Bug, come on, like I'm not." And he's like, "No, seriously, you." But then he says this really ominous thing at the end. "But if we're following you, then Orion is dead."
Right.
It's a very ominous way to phrase it.
Well,
It's
and, go ahead.
I was going to say, and then Light Ray, pops out of a boom tube and disintegrates the poor bastard.
Well, and he also finds out that Orion, so the bugs were just kind of like, hey, we're not okay with this. We're tired of being the front lines for the gods. So they brought the queen in and then decapitated her and put her head next to Granny Goodness's.
Yeah. It's like,
and
or
it's
else.
Yeah. And so it's kind of like, well, Orion has become Darkseid. And there's this conversation later of Darkseid is, what does that even mean? And
he goes back to bed, and what I thought was very interesting that you bring that up is that when he goes back to bed, it's the first time he hugs Big Barda, because before he was just kind of lying next to her, but he hugs into her, spoons essentially, and says "love you," and it's like two panels later is the first time, it's the one and only time this issue we get that all black panel that says Darkseid is, and it's almost like the moment he goes for comfort, the moment he's like, oh, I want to feel better about life, I want to feel better that things aren't all bad, he goes to hug Big Barda. And then that's when it's still there. Darkseid is.
And something I thought that was really telling from Light Ray is that he says that the bug was instructed specifically not to go and speak to Scott. So Orion's afraid of Scott.
Well, he can escape anything, right? Like, so but whatever plans that Orion has for him, like we've seen this, that like he wouldn't kneel. Right?
Yeah.
And he had that in that last issue, he just stared him down.
I think, though, with the bugs being such a bulk of the army, though, he's afraid of Scott overthrowing him.
Right.
Yeah, and he has a thing the next day. He obviously lying in bed after Darkseid is, he actually says Darkseid is. People say that, but what does it even mean? Is it nothing?
People just think it sounds cool.
It sounds cool.
And that seems like a really big meta commentary on the first issue where it's like, did he put that in just because it sounds cool, and it'll get people's attention.
And
but in doing that though, it can mean anything. Like going forward, because 3 issues into this now, this is definitely a story about depression and how it affects your life.
Yeah,
and
I
all
think
the stuff that it brings with
but
it.
More specifically, Matt, though, I think just to hit the theme of this character is the feeling of trapped. That feeling of trapped that comes with depression. Because he's an escape artist, he's trying to escape. That's kind of the whole thing.
And so we keep getting talked about the the paranoid pill. Like there's this, we don't know whose the captions are coming from. It's like this grand narrator, and we keep going to there. So like Pete just said, he's trapped by this depression. That's what Darkseid is. It's any time that he can feel comfortable, he's kind of reminded about this. And so that whole first issue, we kind of just see him functioning at life. And here, so it keeps interjecting the Darkseid is. But here, things are getting, a little bit more sideways. And how does he respond as he keeps trying to ignore it? And then it pops up, and then he's in this self-realization. He's like, well, what does that even mean? What is this? And he kind of just goes on, and we see him do this death trap that he gets out of, and then is having dinner or lunch on the street, at this little sidewalk cafe with Barda. And I thought that scene was a lot of fun.
Yeah, the scene with Barda, because again, they have this kind of touching little moment where they hold hands, but then he pulls his hand away, and he's like, this isn't about me, what I did to myself. It's like he's not really sure. He's kind of confused about it, and it comes up in the next scene when he goes to see Orion, and he demands to talk to him, and Orion just wants to see him one-on-one, doesn't want anyone else there. Yeah. He's like, hey, Highfather told me this, and obviously we know Barda mentioned that Darkseid had the anti-life equation. He's like, I think it's in us. I think it's in me, and it might be in you too. Which is maybe going back to that. Maybe that's why Orion's acting the way he is. If he's been, because there's one of my favorite panels of the whole book here is when it's like he says this for the first time, and it goes to Orion, and you see his reflection in the glass. He's looking out the window.
Yeah, I love that you see it's the negative as well. Yeah, because obviously that plays into anti-life being the negative.
Yeah, it's really cool, and I like the idea because obviously we started this book with a really dark, a suicide attempt, and it's like, what if that is to do with the anti-life? What if it is in them, and that's what is causing him to do this, and that's what makes him feel trapped. It's an interesting idea, and that's the entire last scene where he tries to tell him this. He tries to tell him they need to do something, and Orion just beats the shit out of him.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just stomps in his face repeatedly. It's really violent, and then he just says, "Have you ever seen the face of God?" He pulls off his helmet, his mask, and he says, "This is the face of," and it just says that repeatedly. The last page until the narrator comes
it's
in.
stuck on a little bit of a loop, isn't it?
Yeah, and it goes to the bad video effect with the tracking lines and stuff. It's almost like you almost think that he maybe just said it once, but then Scott in his head is just replaying it.
I think that's exactly what it is. It's on an old videotape where when you played it too many times, it would deteriorate.
Yep.
That's what this looks like. He's playing that moment so much, and it gets worse every time he plays it. And it's just ruining the image.
I love that. The young folk, because it's actually feasible at this point that we have maybe 18-year-olds who have never looked at a VHS tape and are watching, listening to this show, and they're like, "Oh, I'm glad you explained that because we have never touched that."
I can also, when I read that, I could feel the hum that you got when you put in the VHS.
Yeah.
So they're doing a really good job at that. There's also another line where Scott's picking himself up, or he's laying there, and Orion's like, "Look at me, brother," and he's just like, "You're not my brother," and it's they got swapped, and even through all the darkness, Scott has risen up and become this person, and whereas Orion basically got treated the best way, and he's become this monster.
Yeah, and I think this whole idea of the darkness inside and fighting the back, I think that's the point of the lunch scene where the girl comes up and is like, "Hey, you're Mr. Miracle. Can I get a photo? Oh, and you too. I love Big Bird." It's like it's showing, despite all this darkness, they are contributing something good to the world. Like this girl is delighted to see them, and they pose for this little photo with her. It's actually like. It's very,
I like it a lot.
Yeah, there's very few times where I'll see what looks like a panel that's an Instagram post in a comic book and smile about it. But I genuinely felt like, no, like they actually do put good things into the world, but they're dealing with such darkness inside them to fight through it. And I think that's where the whole idea that this book is about fighting depression. It's about fighting mental illness. That metaphor, that analogy really strikes through. It's like you do contribute
really
to the world.
He's perfect for it.
Yeah,
because he's the master escape artist.
Plus,
but he's having trouble.
He's wearing a Batman shirt, so he's just gonna because Batman is way through.
Well, I just feel it's Tom King connecting his two books. That's just that. But yeah, through all of this, it's Scott Free is that perfect character to touch on these, because he is fighting a war, and people that are going through depression, they need to know that people have their back like Barda has Scott's. Like, no matter what we see in this, she's always right there for him.
Yeah, and you make people smile. That's what it boils down to. That scene is that he makes this girl smile, and that he contributes something. And I think so that's the analogy. That's the meta kind of message that's going on, the subtext. But I think the actual text, just the idea of the evils within, and the idea of Darkseid is within them, and if that's the anti-life equation, if it's not, whatever. But you
can't ever completely purge it, but you can learn to deal with it.
It's the feeling of dread that it's evoking. I think I said this in one of the last issues, that it's very cosmic horror, Lovecraftian almost. This feeling of dread where it's coming for you.
Something interesting. I've just been looking at. The Darkseid is the black panel. There's the only one in this issue.
It's in the last issue.
Unless I'm miscounting, it is dead center. Like to the panel, it is the center of the issue. It is at the center of everything.
Well, it was only one last issue. I feel like it was later in the book last issue though, so I don't know if that... It was later in the book last issue, but here it was like it feels like no. Darkseid is it's at the center of everything. This blackness is what he is on the inside. Yeah. That's pretty cool. I like that a lot.
That's astute, Connor.
It's easy to count when they're to the panel. It's so easy to count when it's all in 9-panel grids. Every page is the same layout.
I can't credit the user here, because it was just sort of a tweet I saw randomly at some point in the week, and it was just the way it was phrased was really interesting to me. They were asking Tom King if eventually the book would break away from the 9-panel grid, and the way they phrased it was, when he breaks out of the comic, and I went, huh. And I thought, does the 9-panel grid almost act like a cage on each page? If you look at
it's very much like bars, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm like, is that when it finally breaks away? Is when he?
Oh man, when we get a full. Sorry.
Go and see. That's just that's exactly what I was going to get to.
Yeah, but when we get, because you just talking about it made me realize it, and when we get to a full page spread of something, it's going to mean so much more than kind of like we were complaining about Detective. Like every other page is a 2-page spread, and yeah, it looks pretty, but after so many of them, they lose their impact. But here, if we just keep getting 9 all the way through, and then boom, there's one in the middle of issue like 8. It's going to feel huge.
Especially if it's like a heroic moment or maybe a self-victory moment where he realises he can fight back. But, you know, when he realises hope's not all gone, like, that could be a really big moment.
And I think you said there, it loses its effect. I don't think this does because it has a purpose. We see the purpose of this £9 grid is, whereas the double-page spreads just feel like, they're for big spectacle, and they kind of lose their effect a little bit. Also,
even if this whole idea of breaking out the comic is nothing, if that's vapor, I think just the 9-panel grid. One, it's a very simple layout that works. It doesn't feel flashy, so it doesn't feel like you're using a gimmick. And then, secondly, because the way this comic is, we've talked about this in the previous issues, and again here, with him like in bed shuffling around, with him getting up and taking the drink of milk, and it's like it plays the beats of the moments where you feel the actions between each panel.
It makes everything feel like you're just going through the motions because everything's the same. It's like you're just watching, like where where he's climbing up the tower. It's just back and forth like on either side of the ladder, and that's it. It's just that for a page.
It emulates time, like you feel the time passing because it's going through it beat by beat. Well,
and like Connor's saying, from what I've heard with people with depression, it feels kind of you're just going through the motion. So they're making you, Gerards and King are making you go through that with Scott, and you can't get out of it because, like Pete was saying too, you're trapped.
And I think that's actually
trapped.
And I think that's the best thing about the book is just the feeling it evokes as you're reading it. That's what's there so strong. It's just
God damn. There's these books that you kind of read, and you're like, yeah, I liked it, but then when you talk about it, it makes you like them more. And that was definitely this
Remember
issue.
that first issue where Matt was like, I think I really like this.
Yeah. The more I read it, the more I like it. Or the more I talk about it, the more I like it for sure. And I liked it. I was really high on this issue coming in, but just talking about it with you two as we go and
I say that about certain TV shows all the time that we cover. It's like, no, I enjoy watching it, but when I talk about it and think about it, I enjoy it even more.
Yeah, there's definitely stuff like that we hit, and this is one of them. And I think it often ends up being some of the better stuff that feels that way because it's usually because it's been a bit more subtle, so you have to think about it, but once you hit that point and you get what it's doing, it feels so much more satisfying because you had to get there.
It's the depth and the layers to it, isn't it?
They didn't just hand it to you on a platter, you had to think about it, but it makes it feel rewarding when you get there.
And the fact that the guy writing it was half of the team that was making Dick Grayson butt jokes throughout Grayson, too. Just like, and was probably responsible for him doing the James Bond theme.
Oh, that was definitely him.
Yeah, like
given his CIA background, that was definitely King.
Like the fact that he's telling this deep story with the new gods, and it's so dark and brutal, but also there's these super nice light moments, like the Instagram thing. Yeah. Like it's insane to me that this is the same guy. So
yeah. And his Batman's been going from strength to strength, so
and obviously Gerard's is still killing it as well.
The art's
on the art,
beautiful,
and the way he jumps between styles for whatever moment, it's really incredible. And it still feels consistent. Yeah,
because like Home Life's got this blue cold color, and then when he's like in Apocalypse, it's this deep reds. But then when it's like he's performing on TV, it's just a sort of more pastel kind of vibe to it.
Yeah, and then you've got all like the video effects. You've got the pop art dots at times.
Yeah, it's very, very well thought out. Everything's got a purpose. Everything's chosen very specifically for a reason. You never feel like, oh, this is just because it'll be cool. No, this has been thought of. There's a thematic reason why this page has this style and not that page.
Yeah. Exactly.
So, so Mr. Miracle is fantastic. By all means, if you've been not jumping on it, give it a try. Yeah, it's been doing well as well. Like issue 2 had multiple printings. I think 3. I don't know if it's been announced yet, but it'll probably have a second printing.
It deserves them.